So there are four principal reasons why I believe in God. When I say I believe in God, I mean I believe there is a God, that he is the God who is the author of the Bible. I believe what he's written is true, and I believe that he's working out a purpose with the earth and with mankind. So, four reasons why I believe in God. The word of God that he has given us is the only rational explanation for the origin of the universe. We'll look at that in a minute. It's the only answer to the problem of biogenesis, which means how did life begin? How did life come from non-living matter? It's the only explanation for the content of the whole of the Bible. Man could not have written this book. Only God could. And fourthly, fulfilled prophecy. So let's open the Bible where God begins in Genesis chapter 1 and verse 1. I believe this is the only rational explanation for the origin of the vast universe that man cannot measure, cannot probe the depths of it, does not understand how it works. So Genesis 1 verse 1, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. So if there is an all-powerful God, it's logical that he created all things. So what's the alternative if there is one? We believe Genesis 1 verse 1 or what? Well, I'm going to introduce you to an article in the National Geographic magazine. National Geographic has been published for over 130 years, and in 2017 they published an article, The Origins of the Universe Explained. So this is the thinking of man, this is the latest thinking of science and academia on the origin of the universe. I'm not going to quote you great chunks from the article. I've just picked out a few phrases and sentences which will give you the gist of it. And the author of the article believed in the Big Bang Theory, that sometime in the remote past, billions of years ago, all the matter of the universe was compressed into a tiny, tiny fragment, which then exploded, and from that came the universe. So this is some of what he wrote. It is thought that, so there's no proof, this is the current thinking of man. Our current theories haven't yet figured out how a single unified force would work. So they believe that the four principal forces of the universe were all at that time condensed into one, but they don't understand how it would work. To pull this off, we'd need to know how gravity works on the subatomic scale, but we currently don't. It's also thought that that model may explain it. It's still unclear what exactly powered inflation, the expansion of this tiny, minute, incredibly dense material. Physicists are still trying to figure out exactly how matter won out in the early universe. What that is saying is man doesn't know. He has theories, he has ideas, but he doesn't know. God tells us. Genesis 1 verse 3. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. Verse 14, and God said, "Let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons, for days and for years. And let them be for lights in the firmament of heaven to give light upon the earth." And it was so. And God made two great lights, the greater light to rule the day and the lesser light to rule the night. He made the stars also. So Genesis 1 is telling us that on the first day, God created light. And on the fourth day, God created the sun, the moon, and the stars. And for years, critics of the Bible have said, that's ridiculous. How can you have light without the sun? Well, we looked at the National Geographic. I'll introduce you now to another prestigious organization, NASA, the North American Space Agency. And if you Google NASA Big Bang and look at images, the first image that you will get on the screen is this one, which is NASA's view of how the Big Bang happened over they speculate 13.7 billion years. But if you look on the left side of the screen, you will notice that they've got, top left, afterglow light pattern, 380,000 years. And then down the bottom, first stars, about 400 million years. So man's current thinking is actually in line with Genesis 1. There was light before there was a star. The Bible has always been right because it's the word of God. Now, what about the creation of life? Genesis 1 and verse 11. And God said, "Let the earth bring forth grass, the herb yielding seed, and the fruit tree yielding fruit after his kind, whose seed is in itself upon the earth." And it was so. Verse 20. And God said, "Let the waters bring forth abundantly the moving creature that hath life, and fowl that may fly above the earth in the open firmament of heaven." So God created great whales, and every living creature that moveth, which the waters brought forth abundantly after their kind, and every winged fowl after his kind. And God saw that it was good. Verse 24. And God said, "Let the earth bring forth the living creature after his kind, cattle and creeping thing, and beast of the earth after his kind." And it was so. Verse 26. And God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth." Genesis 1 is telling us that all living creatures were made by God after their kind. And there can be very little crossbreeding between species. You can cross a horse with a donkey and get a mule, but the mule is sterile. You can cross a lion with a tiger, but the offspring is sterile. So that's what God presents to us in his word. Again, we ask man, what's the alternative? That's a quotation from The New Scientist, another prestigious human organization. The question of how life began is one of the most profound in science. In other words, it's very difficult. Scientists cannot agree on an answer. It continues to be a topic for debate. They want to know about extraterrestrial life. But basically they're saying they don't know. Nothing is proven. God, in his word, has revealed what he did in the beginning, and man cannot disprove that. What the Bible tells us about the history of the creation is repeatedly proven when we look at the earth and the solar system. So let's have a look at some examples stretching over most of the period of the writing of the Bible. My belief is the only possible explanation for the Bible as we have it is that God caused it to be written. So Genesis chapter 6 to 8 speak of a worldwide flood which covered the whole earth. Modern scientific man denies that it ever happened. There was no such flood. But look at the evidence. Every high mountain range on this earth, the Himalayas, the Rockies, the Andes, the Pyrenees, the Alps, the upper parts of those mountain ranges all contain fossils. Fossils which had been laid down underwater. Fossil graveyards have been found in many parts of the earth. There's one in Kirkdale in Yorkshire, and you look at the list of the bones and fossils of the creatures that they've found there. Many of them creatures which don't exist in this country at this time. There's an even bigger one in Charleston, South Carolina, 40 square miles of it. Fossils of all kinds of creatures. And in Montrose in Colorado, they found in the same strata fossilized human skeletons and dinosaur fossils. These fossil graveyards testify to the sudden destruction caused by water of myriads of creatures. And then there are flood legends. all over the world. Flood legends which tell of destruction by water and humans saved. Almost all of them speak about a great boat. About half of them speak about a divine cause and prior warning given to man, which is exactly what Genesis says. Let's have a look now at some archaeological evidence that confirms the scriptures. That's a picture of a steel piece of pottery with writing on it that was found in the north of the land of Israel, Dan. And it speaks of the wars that are recorded in the second book of Kings between Hazael, the king of Syria, and Joram, the king of Israel, and Ahaziah, the king of Judah. And it explicitly mentions that Joram, as Ahaziah of Judah, was of the house of David. David the king is spoken of in the scriptures. His life is detailed for us. There is an archaeological piece of evidence. David existed and founded a dynasty. The strange thing is that the school of man's critical thinking will accept anything that the Greek historian Herodotus wrote around about 4th century BC, or the Jewish historian Josephus, or the Roman historian Pliny in the 1st century AD. But they won't accept the history of the Bible unless it's confirmed from other sources. Strange, but that's the way man thinks. In Isaiah chapter 20, we read about the year that Tartan came to Ashdod when Sargon, king of Assyria, sent him. For years, that record was rubbished by Bible critics. We've never heard of Sargon, king of Assyria. It didn't exist, and we don't know who this Tartan is. And then Sargon's palace was uncovered. And they found that relief on the wall showing Sargon, the king of Assyria, speaking with his Tartan, who was his army commander, about the warfare that they were going to conduct. And the critics stopped saying that Isaiah chapter 20 isn't true. The Bible records the battle of the Assyrians against the kingdom of Judah. And the Assyrian king was Sennacherib. And his account of that warfare has been discovered, confirming the Bible record and speaking about Hezekiah, the king of Judah. And Hezekiah was a real person. His seal has been found belonging to Hezekiah, son of Ahaz, king, which is exactly how the Bible describes it. So there's multitudes of archaeological evidence confirming the history of the Bible. When we look at other aspects of the Bible, laws in the Old Testament dating from the time of Moses, laws which God gave to Israel concerning infection control, involving washing, involving diagnosis, involving isolation of those who were sick, are 3,500 years ahead of their time. That's what we're all having to do now because of the plague that we have in the earth. Now, in the Bible, God reveals in detail the future of nations, of mankind, and planet Earth. And only if there is a God who is all-powerful and totally in control could these things be. So, in the 7th chapter of the book of Daniel, we have a vision that was given to Daniel the prophet of 4 beasts. And within the book of Daniel itself, they are identified as the kingdom of Babylon, followed by the kingdom of the Medes and Persians, the kingdom of the Greeks, and the empire of the Romans. And there are remarkable details about those beasts, which you can see on the screen. The lion has eagle's wings. The bear has 3 ribs within its teeth. The leopard has 4 heads and 4 wings. The 4th beast has 4 horns. And all of those details have significance in the history of those nations. And the great climax of it all is that the kingdom of men is overthrown and the kingdom of God is established upon the earth. Can we turn now to the prophecy of Ezekiel and chapter 38? This is an amazing prophecy, the details of which have been steadily being fulfilled over centuries. It foretells a mighty invasion by Russia and her allies of the land of Israel. There was an interesting report that we saw a couple of days ago that the Ukrainians had discovered vast reserves of gas under the Black Sea, which they were intending to develop and exploit, so that they would, instead of being a gas importer from Russia, be a major gas exporter. So that's one of the reasons why Mr. Putin has mobilized his troops and invaded Ukraine, because he wants to control the supplies of energy. Well, we'll see there's something about that in Ezekiel 38. So let's start in 1640 with the French historian Samuel Bochart, who wrote about Ezekiel 38. Ezekiel 38, verse 1, "And the word of the Lord came unto me, saying, Son of man, set thy face against Gog, the land of Magog, the prince of Rosh, Meshech, and Tubal, and prophesy against him." That phrase, which in the authorized version is translated the chief priest, should be the prince of Rosh. And in 1640, Bochart was saying that this Rosh is the most ancient form under which history makes mention of the name of Russia. Rosh and Meshech, Moscow, and Tubal is the capital of Siberia, Tobolsk further east. This is the territory that God is prophesying about. And these things were correctly identified in the 17th century and earlier. Verse 8 says, "After many days thou shalt be visited. In the latter years thou shalt come into the land that is brought back from the sword and is gathered out of many people against the mountains of Israel, which have been always waste, but it is brought forth out of the nations, and they shall dwell safely, all of them." And from 1882 onwards, the Jews started to go to the land. Over 500,000 of them emigrated between 1882 and 1948. And they went in poverty with very little. They started to cultivate the land, build settlements. They were gathered out of many nations, Eastern European primarily, but many other nations. Jews went to the land, just as God had said. And did you notice in the middle of verse 8 there, it mentions Israel. The name Israel occurs 6 times in Ezekiel 38. And when the new state was proposed in 1948, there was much discussion about what it should be called. When David Ben-Gurion stood up to declare that there was now a Jewish state in the world, he said, "We hereby declare the establishment of a Jewish state in Eretz Israel, the land of Israel, to be known as the State of Israel." And it had to be called Israel because this chapter and other chapters in the Bible required it. And verse 8 also mentions the mountains of Israel. That's the territory which is currently known as the West Bank. And that area was not within the boundaries of Israel as the nation state was declared in 1948. But in 1967, in the Six-Day War, Israel took it. And since then, many Jewish settlements have been built in the mountains of Israel, fulfilling again the details of Ezekiel 38. Verse 12. "This great host, Russia and her allies, are coming," says verse 12, "to take a spoil and to take a prey, to turn thine hand upon the desolate places that are now inhabited, upon the people that are gathered out of the nations, which have gotten cattle and goods that dwell in the midst of the land." And for years, Bible students wondered what would be the spoil that this great host would come to take. Then in 2009, the Tamar gas field was discovered under the sea off the coast of Israel. Came on stream in 2013, and now 70% of Israel's gas is generated by gas-fired power stations. And they've discovered more huge fields of gas under the sea. They're now beginning to become a gas exporting nation, 5 billion cubic meters of gas per year to Egypt. They're now supplying Jordan. They're also world leaders in the desalination of seawater, and they're beginning to supply water to Jordan. And even the Arab countries who tried to defeat Israel in the wars of 1967 and 1973 are investing in Israel's offshore gas. There's talk of a pipeline from Israel to Cyprus to Greece to supply Israeli gas into Europe. Mr. Putin will not like that idea. And this chapter says that Russia is going to come to seek to take that spoil and to conquer the land of Israel. Israel is now a rich and prosperous nation, exactly as foretold in the scriptures. I could go on. There's many, many more details in Ezekiel 38. There's many, many more prophecies which have been fulfilled. There is no other book like this. So I believe in God, the God of the Bible, the creator of the heavens and the earth. I believe he is the only source of life. He has given life to the things that he has made. I believe that he caused the Bible to be written. He's the ultimate author of it. Its history is accurate. Its laws are good and right. Its moral standards are unimpeachable. Through its pages, God has told us what the future holds. That he is going to establish his kingdom upon earth. And then there will be peace. He's given us detailed evidence of the outworking of his purpose to give us grounds for faith. And therefore I conclude with these words of the Apostle Paul. And now I commend you to God and to the word of his grace, which is able to build you up and to give you an inheritance among all them that are sanctified. The Bible has the power to do this, if only you will read it.